Well, welcome
just a comment about the recording, Rick, before we get started. With what we're presenting, I know we're going through a lot of this fast and so on, and we really want people to try to maybe go back, digest some of it by looking at the recordings in the future, or people who can't join us today to be able to use them. The weekend's coming up. I don't know if you want to, how much time you want to spend doing this over the weekend, but if you should, we're going to try to get all three recorded sessions up today, right, Rick? So that on Blackboard, so that we can have them work over the weekend if they want to and go back over. Now that we're at the midway point, I think it's probably a good idea for those that want to try it out on your own. In other words, take some of the things that we're talking about, since we don't have the luxury of time to be able to walk you through it as you're doing it with as many people who are on the session. This is kind of an overview, but we do intend on breaking down sessions later after these are over into specific, more manageable sessions. And maybe, Rick, you want to talk a little bit about utilizing the instructional designers, as well as we mentioned since the last meeting.
Yeah, there were a couple of questions before you came on about, all of this, and because this is a lot of information to process and to put together. All the information, all the handouts from Monday, Wednesday, today, and all the ones that we'll do next week will be loaded on the Blackboard shell. The videos are up there for the first two. The full complete module for Monday session is there. Wednesday session, I believe the video is up as an MP4. Nicole was converting it over and putting it up as a YouTube as well. We will post them both, and we're doing that. They just take a bit of time to render and to kind of get up. We will do that with today's and hopefully have it up later this afternoon if we can. They're not terribly long to do. It just takes a period of time for those to render in both the MP4 and to load them up onto YouTube, but all the handouts are there. As you go through and you are developing and modifying courses for your fall sessions, if you have any questions, both Alicia and Shannon are available along with Nicole to assist you in any process. If you've got questions, I am certainly available to answer anything and to assist and help. We are planning, these are some generalized sessions. We will most likely have some other sessions. We may even at some point here over the next couple of weeks set up more like a panel or a Q&A. You will probably also see the instructional designers setting up not only one-on-one sessions with you, which you are more than welcome to reach out to them, and they will be glad to schedule a one-on-one time. But they will most also likely set up sometime within the next couple of weeks, for lack of a better term, just some online instructional design office hours. And they'll probably send those out where they'll have a blanket, Google Hangout session that you can jump into and ask any questions that you want, or they can assist you with anything. And if you can't meet those times, you can certainly email them and they'll set up a one-on-one. But the material is all up along with a whole bunch of other stuff on the Blackboard CIT shell. It's entitled Center for Innovative Teaching Organization. It will show up at the bottom of everybody's course list on the right side of your Blackboard. Once you enter Blackboard, it will be at the bottom because you're all listed in there as students. If you do not see it, it's likely you have not been enrolled in that. And if you haven't, please email me immediately or email Nicole Carlins, and we will make sure that we get you enrolled. Okay, very simple. So, John, go ahead, sir.
Okay, yeah, and I just want to reiterate one point, because I know in the past for faculty that the instructional designers were looked at more or less as being able to help you with your online courses, but that's changed, as Dr. Fuller, as Rick has mentioned many times. So this is for any modality. If you have questions about how to use Blackboard or how to integrate either the technical requirements of it, work it, or integrate pedagogical practices appropriately for face-to-face or virtually rotated classes that you may be assigned in the fall, synchronous sessions, or the typical asynchronous fully online. they're there to help you. So, take advantage of that, as Rick's already pointed out. Okay. All right. Moving along here. What I want to do first is to just recap very quickly what we did in session 2 on Wednesday and show how session 3 that we're starting today will tie in directly as a continuation of what we talked about on Wednesday. Session 2, what we did was we talked about using the Start Here menu link and including specific things in there that are suggested through the template that's provided with all of your courses, but also the ability for you to customize it and add or delete things as you think are necessary in that with that Start Here link. We talked about including the syllabus, the textbook information. I showed an information sheet if you decided to use something like that. Those are some of the things that we suggest that you consider whenever you're designing your course up front and you're ready to get your students started on utilizing the Blackboard shell. And then how you open the Blackboard shell, when you make it accessible, and maybe using announcements or emails either within Blackboard or not to your students so that they can get prepared for their course ahead of time, particularly with things like purchasing the textbook and reading over the syllabus in advance. Which is really very important for fully online classes, but it can also be important on some of your face-to-face or synchronous or hybrid courses as well. Using, as I mentioned, the Blackboard announcement feature specifically and all the nuances of the buttons that you press there and the send email features, and then setting up potentially a link, an additional link other than simply the Start Here link in the left navigation panel, something like called, for example, maybe first class meeting link, particularly if you're dealing with a synchronous course or a face-to-face course. And then maybe instead for an online course in week 1, point them to that in your announcement. And then within the week 1 link, have a separate folder called Course Introduction, perhaps, where you give them instructions, background information. And we even talked about maybe if you'd like using a video of yourself introducing the course, or maybe a voiceover PowerPoint presentation that introduces the course, and even using maybe snippets from your syllabus to highlight some of the things that they can consider and look at ahead of time before the course begins. So that's all about before the course actually launches or starts. Now today, at the bottom of the screen here, you can see moving forward how to explain the necessary use of Blackboard to your students in week 1 for online courses, or during the first class meeting that you meet with them either face-to-face or like we're doing right now synchronously, should that be the way that you meet with them the first time. It's really important that you not necessarily take for granted that the students know how to use Blackboard. I know most of them do because they've had it in many of their other courses, but not all do. And some people, as I mentioned before, maybe their first semester at Robert Morris, regardless of whether it's even the second 8 weeks of a spring semester, for example, when we have rolling admission for some of our graduate programs and so on. And also for transfer students. So and also the fact that everybody's Blackboard shell, as we've been talking about since Monday, could potentially look a little bit different. Because we aren't trying to cookie cutter this and say that you have to have the design a particular way. So to introduce the students to how you intend to use Blackboard as the instructor, and also how you expect them to use Blackboard as the student, is something that we strongly encourage you to suggest or to deal with up front in either week 1 of an online course or the first class meeting of a synchronous or a face-to-face course. So with that in mind, some possible things to consider with regard to introducing Blackboard to your students. The first thing, to ensure that they're comfortable with using Blackboard the way you've designed it. Let's talk about that separately for online and for face-to-face synchronous. So for face-to-face synchronous, perhaps like you normally would do in your class, review the course syllabus as needed, depending upon how much you've already asked them to do ahead of time. Walk them through your Blackboard structure with a demonstration in class, showing them the left navigation links, what's going to be out there for them to use. Show them the consistent, hopefully, folder item structure within each one of the weekly links that you put out for them to use during the class so that they know what to expect. Then also locate, demonstrate, preview any tools that you're going to expect them to use in Blackboard and how to find them within the Blackboard system. And I think that's a good way for your face-to-face courses and synchronous courses to kind of get them off the ground. With regard to the consistent folder and item structure, we're going to be talking about that more as our seminars go on. There's a lot of flexibility there as well with regard to how you establish and put out your instructional materials, your assignments, your expectations for involvement in online discussions and so on. Just like there was flexibility for how you design the left navigation panel that we've already talked about in our previous 2 sessions. So those are just some things to think about when you're using Blackboard as a supplement for a face-to-face course, or when you're using Blackboard in a synchronous session. Now, that synchronous session could be, one that has been converted to online, and you've made an arrangement with your students that everybody's going to meet at a certain time, and you're going to either deliver some instruction or provide some direction for how to do assignments or what have you. It also, synchronous in this case, could also mean the students that are kind of coming into your session as you're dealing with half of your students live in the classroom, but they're coming in remotely. That also would be considered an element of synchronous. And it looks like that's probably going to be, a lot of us are going to face, with our face-to-face classes in the fall, the necessity to be able to manage a virtually rotated class in that regard. In the second element here, the second part B that you see on the screen here, how do you do the same for fully online? Because you're not going to have the luxury of being able to walk them through it the same way, because your whole course, your fully online course, may be totally asynchronous, which is perfectly acceptable. But then you don't have, like I said, the luxury of being face-to-face to walk them through, demonstrate how Blackboard's going to be used. So you have to decide, okay, and this is one of the things we want to talk about as we move forward in this series, is how do you take what you do effectively in the classroom as an instructor and convert it to providing them the same experience in a fully online asynchronous mode when you're not physically present to talk to them. And, some of the options are you let them read something, you write out something to them, you create a video of you talking to them, you use a narrated PowerPoint presentation. So some of these things that I'm talking about in part A here on the screen could be converted equally as an instructor to fully online using one of those approaches that I just mentioned. You might say, well, I've never done that before. How do you do that? Well, those are the things that we are going to address next week in our last 3 sessions and talk about exactly how you can physically and use tools in Blackboard to provide that kind of information to them up front. So I think this is a good segue directly into one of the concepts that we wanted to talk about today from both a theoretical perspective that Rick's going to talk about, and then from a practical perspective, which I'm going to follow after him and show you some examples of how to do and answer any questions with other alternatives or things that you think might be appropriate. But it's the idea of something that we refer to as instructor presence. And instructor presence is obviously not a problem when you're doing synchronous like now, or it's not a problem when you're face-to-face in your classroom, but it is a problem for fully online, typically asynchronous course delivery. And so what we want to do is show you, because some of you, as you probably read the president's memo to all of us this morning, promises that he's made to students moving forward, because that email also went out to them, as I understand it, is that some of the courses that were traditionally to be delivered face-to-face are going to be in an online mode. So you will be told somewhere in beginning of August that maybe some of your courses got converted from on-ground to online. And if they did, then this would be more than appropriate for you to have to deal with. Like, how am I going to make sure that I'm there for them and that they feel my presence, so to speak, in an asynchronous online course when they can't see me face to face and they can't ask me questions on the fly. So it provides a whole different learning modality for those of you that maybe haven't taught fully online before. Those of you that have, you certainly know that. And what we want to try to avoid is a correspondence course. This isn't like you just send the material and, okay, talk to you in 8 weeks and here's your grade. So there should be, interaction between student to student, interaction between any one student and the instructor, and interaction between the instructor and the full group of students in your class. So you need to figure out how you're going to make that instructor presence known. So I'm going to turn this over to Rick now so that he can talk a little bit more about that. So I'm going to stop presenting, and then I'll start presenting when he's done with this, and then I'll show you some physical examples of what we mean specifically about incorporating instructor presence into our online asynchronous courses in particular. I think I'm stopped the slide, so Rick, you should be able to take over, okay?
Very good. Thank you, John. Everybody should be seeing my slides, are you? Very good. Thank you. Just always want to double check, because a couple times you've gone on and you're in slide 3 and you're going, what slides? We don't see slides. All right. Instructor presence is one of those things that you hear about or see about if you're into the literature and into the distance ed or into the online research, but it's far more than that. It really is a way to practice. It's a way to understand. And as John alluded, what we do in a face-to-face setting, what we do when we are teaching and standing in front of a classroom is important. It is equally important in an online, but we do it in a far different way. So I've listed some things up here just to get started. When you talk about instructor presence, I'm also talking about what we call empathetic practice. And I would just ask the group in general, and anybody can answer, they want, what's the difference between empathy and sympathy? Anybody want to take a stab? What's the difference between being empathetic and being sympathetic?
I would say that being empathetic means that you understand where they're coming from, and you can feel what it's like to be in their shoes, and therefore what they're going to need to know. Whereas sympathetic is just feeling sorry for them.
Yep, and I think that's a perfect definition, Kathy. Thank you. Empathy is the ability for you as the instructor to put yourself in the student's shoes, put yourself in their position. It allows you a deeper understanding of what their needs are. Sympathy is, I feel bad, I see that you're going through something, I feel bad that you're going through something, I'm not really sure what you're going through, but I feel bad that you're going through it. Empathy is far more important. Empathetic practice in online is far different. Things are exacerbated, things are amplified for the students, things are amplified for the instructor. Empathetic instructors understand this unique difference between the face-to-face and the online. It is a far different thing, but what we do know is this: good teaching is good teaching no matter what the mode, whether it is face-to-face, whether it is synchronous, whether it is asynchronous, or some blended hybrid approach, whatever term you want to use. While teaching, or what we also call, and there is a unique distinction in the literature between teaching presence and instructor presence, but we'll talk a little bit about those. The instructor presence and the teaching presence is the design, facilitation, and direction of cognitive and social processes for the purpose of realizing educationally worthwhile learning outcomes. So it is a very, very deliberate process. It is something that the literature tells us is really a facilitation process, because you think about the big difference between face-to-face, which many times is very teacher-centric, and the online asynchronous format, which has a tendency to be a little bit more self-directed and a little bit more learner-centric. So we have to be very, very cognizant of what we're doing, and things get amplified a little bit if you want to think about it this way. It really is a binding element in creating what is called a community of inquiry. And we'll talk a little bit about that COI model here in a minute. But this community of inquiry is where students are working together. They are working more in a cooperative session. And when we start talking through the literature, you're looking at creating interactions, what you're doing. Michael Moore tells us that the interaction that we're looking for is creating student-to-student interaction, student-to-instructor interaction, and student-to-content interaction. These are the important elements that we're looking to incorporate. It's really described by some as instructional orchestration, where now you're taking a whole bunch of different elements and pulling them together and trying to coordinate the efforts to make them viable for helping students to learn and to process. Rupert described a student reaction to this whole process in an interview process. He said, it was important for him as a human being to interact not with just a computer or a book, but with others who knew more about the subject than he did and were there to bring it to life through their human side. So in other words, this student was looking for a connection, not only just with the content, but making a connection with the instructor. And I think this is important in face-to-face, as John alluded to, but it's also important in the online. It just has to be a more deliberate action. Online learners generally want to know who their teachers are and want to be connected with them in some way. The literature is telling us this on a variety of different levels. We hear this in K through 12 education. We hear this in higher ed. We hear it throughout training and development. They want to know their teachers. And that's part of a rapport thing we'll talk about here in a couple of minutes. Teaching presence begins before the course commences. This is not something that just happens while you are teaching. It's something that has to be deliberate, especially when you're dealing with online. In a face-to-face setting, we can read our learners. We feed off of them, and that's why a lot of people have a difficult time making that transition online, because you're losing some of those platform skills. When you are standing in front of a group of students, you can react, you can read your students. I'm not saying that you don't plan or that you're winging it, but you read the students and you can react on the fly to make changes to meet their needs. Things in the online are a little bit different. They are more deliberate actions and start from the point of planning and go all the way through the execution and teaching. So it's the pre-active phases and the active phases of teaching, if you want to think of it in that way. These are basically intentional activities that you need to take into consideration. This community of learning, or community of inquiry model was first posted by Garrison in 2000, and he described this as a collaborative learning community functioning in an online environment. And that's in essence what is happening here, and it is different than a face-to-face. It comprises three intersecting elements: that of social presence, which is really how we as instructors, how we as teachers develop rapport with our students. We know from the literature that students learn best from instructors who they have a solid rapport. And that's K through 12. We see that all through the K through 12 research on education, but it is also just as important in higher education. I can tell you from my own perspective, my son, I could tell when he had a good relationship with his teachers growing up. If he did, he was getting A's and B's in classes. If he didn't like the teacher and didn't make a connection with him, he was making lower grades. It's just the nature of what it was. The cognitive presence is what we call and what we talk about how the instructor imparts knowledge. In other words, what do they do to impart the knowledge to? Now, that's very tightly and closely related to Garrison's third element of this, which is the teaching presence, or what we call pedagogical style. It's how we impart this knowledge, but it's the methods that we do. If you think about this, and John alluded to this at the beginning, if you look in any classroom, any face-to-face classroom that we're teaching, no two of us teach the exact same way. That doesn't mean one is better than another. It just means that we are all different. Our personalities come into play. The pedagogical approaches come into play. We read our students, we read our content, we read our material, and we teach appropriately based upon all of those elements. Well, this is of vital importance, and the pedagogical style that we use is vitally important in the online. And this is one of the reasons that we've gone to more of a teaching presence or a teaching style model as opposed to a template model. Where you as the instructor can kind of start to understand the different opportunities that exist, so that we don't just have a cookie cutter approach or a template approach, but you can now step out and start to do some doing. I'm not saying go wild and go crazy. We still know that there are good practices, and that's what we're here to help with, but it provides some opportunities. The whole idea of teaching presence begins at course design. and carries through interaction between students and instructors, both during direct instruction and facilitation of discourse and any other activities that you as the instructor decide are relevant. So what is presence in an online course? It's really the ability for students to know their instructor. They need to know that you are there. They need to know that you are active in the course and that you are a significant part of what's going on. You're not just posting a whole bunch of text material. This is not automated teaching. And that's where I think some people have seen the text-based environments, is that this becomes automated. You know, all I have to do is post it up and then, yeah, I did it last semester. And it's not the old correspondence courses, you know, from years back. It's not learning meat cutting by mail. This is completely different. We are interacting, we are teaching. I've seen courses, and I've been doing this since 1997 and been in administrative roles and out of them, but I've seen a lot of online courses where the instructor just doesn't seem to be there. In other words, as I'm looking through the shell, I do not see the instructor. Oh, I see material, I see text posted, but I really don't see any kind of instructor presence. The instructor just isn't there. And these are the kind of courses that leave students feeling alone, the ones they are more likely to complain about. To those of you who have been in administrative roles or are in administrative roles, you know this. They said, well, I'm just not learning anything. Well, why? When you look at things and have that opportunity, you just generally get the sense that the instructor's just not active there. Oh, they've posted what they needed to. They did the bare bones minimum, but they are not part of an active and engaged learning process. This becomes the key element that sets a good teaching online different from bad teaching. So how is presence seen through this? And when we look at that COI model, well, teaching is the process, an individual style that an online instructor displays. The way you word things, the order in which you put things, the activities that you see and that you facilitate through a course, that is the teaching. It's your pedagogical style. The rapport are the connections that instructors make with their students in building a relationship. This is also key. How do you do this? Well, it's through the interactions. It's through the emails. It's through the text. It's through the postings that you do through discussion boards or wikis or blogs or anything else that you have structured to interact with students. It is how you communicate with them. The personality, this is how the instructor projects themselves, allowing the learners to see who the instructor is, their nature, their teaching style, their interest, just who they are. We all do this. In a face-to-face class, we all provide a certain view, if you would, of who we are. And some instructors provide a greater view of that. Others provide a little bit less. That's not in question. That's just simply your own style and your own personality. That comes through in a face-to-face. It needs to come through in the online as well. What we use is something called, what Holmberg talks about, called conversational tone. I've read too many courses or seen too many course shells where, as I'm reading through, the instructions read like stereo instructions. And we don't want that. We don't want that cold nature to things. We want a little warmer, friendly tone so that when somebody is reading something that you've written, whether it's an opening, a welcome, a set of instructions or directions or something that you're using text to teach them with, or even in any kind of a narrated PowerPoint or video or anything where you are talking to students, text or audio, you want to use this conversational tone. Now, the conversational tone is really the same way that you talk to people when you're standing in front of a classroom. You're not very cold. You're not very direct in that way. You are very friendly in your approach to certain things. And that needs to come over in a text-based environment as well. Well, this is one of the activities I talked about the other day when we were talking about introductory type materials. I do something called a This Is Me, which is really where students introduce themselves in the third person. This is an opportunity for students to get to know each other in a course. This is for an opportunity for them to get to know me. I post up This Is Me, a third person introduction, and then I respond to everybody. Now, this is just an example of some of the text that I use, and I'm not going to go through and read that whole thing, but this is just an actual text that I used, or a discussion board text to respond to a student. Maria, I've also learned never to say never. This is in response to something that she wrote. Too many things come back around and you find yourself doing exactly what you said you would do. You know, laugh out loud. Oh, well, life happens. And I just used more of that same way that if I were introducing myself and we were sharing a moment, I write it that same way. You want to keep the conversational tone. You want to build that level of rapport. This is part of the social presence that Garrison talks about. Presence is the ability for an instructor to be seen. And I keep repeating that, but this is important. This is the main component of this instructor presence. Garrison further tells us through his COI model that the cognitive presence is created through the responses to student questions, comments that are made, scenarios with directions and feedback. And this is something that the teacher displays their knowledge of the subject with. It is very closely related to pedagogy and to the instruction, but this cognitive presence and the teaching presence, these are all interrelated and very, very important. It's also how the instructor uses the tools and techniques that produce interaction in such a way that they project themselves, that the students can see that they're there, and you establish this personal and purposeful relationship that you are building. A lot of times it is not in a synchronous type of communication or real-time communication through emails and such or direct. It's more indirect. So if I post up an announcement, the wording that I use, how I establish things, right as you would talk to a group of students, that helps. Empathetic instructors practice the use of presence so students know I'm there. This is accomplished through selected discussion boards, frequent email contacts, any other kind of text-based communications. Also, many instructors, will use telephone conversations for certain things. If a student is having difficulty, they'll say, hey, call me, or they will provide that. And that's up to every individual instructor, whether you choose to do that or not. One of the things that we find, though, is students, it used to be the rule that if a student sent you an email with a question, you kind of said, well, we'll get back to you in 24 hours. Well, I think things are a little tighter than that. Students are looking for a little more immediacy of return, something within a couple of hours generally. I find myself, practicing this on a weekend. I'm standing in Giant Eagle talking, shopping with my wife, and I'll pick my cell phone up and check email to find out, especially if I'm teaching an online course, and she'll look at me and say, well, you that bored already? And I go, well, yeah, I probably am, but I'm teaching an online class, so I need to check email frequently to find out if a student has a question or something, especially if I know I've got assignments due or something of that nature, or there's some component of the course that I know they potentially could be asking questions. One instructor that I've talked to said, I prepare myself that I am an active participant every day of the semester, and I provide more of a personal touch to each student. Instructors reported using an empathetic presence above and beyond the traditional presence. In other words, they just don't do it just to automate it or get it done. This becomes, again, that deliberate thing. It provides greater access through email, basically 7 days a week, and established phone conferences as needed. In other words, they will say, okay, and I do this. If I can answer a student's question, if I'm standing in Giant Eagle and I can answer it on my phone, I will. If it's something that I know that's going to take me a little bit more of an involved point, I'll respond back and say, hey, I'm not at my computer. I will be within the next few hours. I'll respond then. This way, the student at least knows that you have made some connection with them. And I go, okay, he got my email. I'll get a response back in a couple of hours here. If it's something that I don't think that I can explain as well through text, through an email or something along those lines, I'll say, hey, why don't we set up a conference call? Why don't we do something? I'll set up a Google Meets. We'll do those kind of things just to stay in contact. As another instructor said, I stay in contact regularly with the students in my online classes and give them personalized feedback. The use of smartphone technology has allowed me to increase the speed of my responses even when I'm not able to access my computer. I interact more with my online students than I do with my face-to-face. I find that to be very accurate and very true. I probably spend more one-on-one time with online students than I do face-to-face students. Face-to-face students, I interact with them generally, if I'm teaching a graduate class, it's once a week for 4 hours. And, maybe there's a couple of email exchanges between week to week, but I don't interact with them as much as I interact with students. I interact with them in class through face-to-face, but not through as much as the online. Communications, instructors generally, as we said, respond quickly through email, through smartphones. Um, and as I said, when a detailed response is needed, you can respond quickly later. Trust is a big thing within the online and becomes a major part of this instructor presence. You need to create an environment of trust that allows students to feel important to their instructor and not operating in isolation. When they do not hear from a student, the empathetic instructor, the one who is practicing instructor presence, will make an overt act to reach out. Hey, I haven't seen you online for a couple of weeks. I haven't seen you on for a couple of days. Is everything okay? Making contact and saying, basically, hey, get your butt in gear here. Students generally need that personal touch. They're looking for it. One of the things that I do in order to do this, and think about this, if you're in a face-to-face class, you will make comment back to student, hey, that was a good comment, or that was a great response. But we generally don't see that kind of things in the online because we don't see the opportunity. What I have done is at the beginning of each week where I post a new lesson, I will reference something in the past week. In other words, if I have a couple of students who have had a particularly interesting set of discussions or discussion boards, I'll call them out in my next announcement announcing the next lesson. Hey, if you haven't had a chance, please read Lisa's response to such and such. It really has some great insights. Everybody should. It's one of those things that helps to make that personal connection or provide that personal touch to students as well. Now, all of this does not mean that you drop standards. We as instructors always talk about holding the standards and holding rigor in our teaching. Being empathetic to students' needs, being present in all of these things does not mean that we do not hold the standards. Most of our students are adult learners. We know that. Even our undergraduates, I would probably consider to be adult learners because they have chosen to be there and they're very self-directed. We generally need to be receptive to them and to their needs and to assist them. Sometimes and I will tell you, the online does require more clarification. It's kind of interesting. A lot of things that we post, we think are clear. When I write something in text, I think my instructions are very clear, but how a student may interpret those may be slightly off. So providing a level of clarification, even if you're just repeating what's already there, is important for that. We provide, and sometimes students need a little extra time for things. The key element with this is, as you are understanding in a face-to-face, also be understanding in the online. Okay, that is the important thing. Not to remove standards by any means, but just being more empathetic and more understanding. We need to also be careful in what you say in a text. Do you ever have one of those text moments where somebody has sent you an email or sent you a text and they type in all caps and you say, well, they're screaming, they're angry, or you read something and you overread it to what they intended it to be. In other words, you read and go, oh, that person's pretty angry with me, or they're mad, or they meant this. And then you talk to them and you go, no, I wasn't angry at all. So be careful how you communicate with your students through either, especially on a smartphone, because on a smartphone, I have a tendency to, write shorter messages and keep things a little tighter. Just be careful how you communicate so it doesn't come over as harsh. It doesn't come over the way you hadn't intended it to be. And I've received a lot of communications from people in the university sometimes who I know are writing fast and furious and they're doing things on their smartphone. And then you find out later that's not what they intended. So some questions in closing to think about, to ask yourself. Would my students say I'm active enough in my online course? These are kind of self-reflection questions. What could I do to be more present and more available in my courses? How would my students react to my text-based communications? Am I saying what I really mean? And even more so, could they misinterpret, or how will they interpret it? One of the things that I did when I first started teaching online, because I was dropped into the deep end of the pool without a whole lot of instruction, was I sat at my computer and I thought, okay, how are my students going to receive, when I write this, how are they going to receive it on the other end of the computer? Would my students say I create a safe online environment? And do my students trust me? These are all questions that may help along the way as you take a look in your design processes, what has been written. Think about it empathetically from, are you present enough, and how will students see things? Questions about anything that we just talked about? Okay, John, hearing none, I will turn this back over to you, sir.
I have a quick, Rick.
Surely.
The combination of the technical, to be empathetic, in the second half of the last semester, when we shifted to online teaching, I was using very primitive way, because in face-to-face class, I use the blackboard a lot, or the whiteboard. I always explain things on the board to the students. And students, of course, if you don't do that, they get frustrated if they don't understand. So what I did in the synchronous, or the Google Out Meet, I would have a stack of scratch paper, and I would illustrate on them, and I would display it on the camera. Would there be any more sophisticated way of doing this to replace the presence of the instructor?
I understand what you're saying. In other words, when you move to a synchronous environment from a face-to-face, there are some limitations over that face-to-face interactions that you have. Synchronous, for certain things, has a tendency to be a little bit more cumbersome, and you need to do some workarounds. Now, there are some opportunities that will be coming, as I understand, by the end of the summer, before we get involved in fall classes, that Google, which is now called Google Meets, they've taken the Hangouts away. The Google Meets is now going to be providing a whiteboard option. You'll have some breakout rooms, and I think there's a couple of other new tools and features that will allow you to draw on a whiteboard screen that all students can visualize. You can certainly do the kind of things that John and I are doing, where you're sharing files or you're sharing certain things. But again, that becomes cumbersome, especially if you're trying to write and draw and explain on the fly and actually do, real-time face-to-face teaching. You can do some of that on a whiteboard, but that's not as easy as standing up and writing on a dry erase board in your classroom. What I might suggest, as some have done, is to get a whiteboard behind you. In other words, in the screen behind you, and move your camera further away. And then if you want to, write and draw and explain the same way that you would in a face-to-face class. That is another option. It's just something that you have to make sure you have a decent enough camera, and most of the laptops that are coming out of the university have something that will work. Dr. Bernadowski, Carrie-Ann Bernadowski out of education, who has not done a tremendous amount of online teaching and really wasn't sure how she was going to be able to transition to this, did just that. She says, look, this is what happens. I teach, I do exactly what you're talking about. And she went out and got herself a dry erase board, put it up behind her on an easel, and gave her, checked her camera so that it made sure that it was within frame, checked her lighting and all that. And she taught that way. And she had, her 16 students on the screen, and she taught from the background, and she was able to do that. So that's an option, an opportunity. I think it's just, we're looking sometimes for transitional kind of things, for different ways to do things. And sometimes it's just a matter of thinking digitally and how students will receive the information.
Rick, I have also used Notebook as a whiteboard, and it's very easy to extend the screen or add a page.
Yes.
It's also easy to go back and forth between various applications.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, is what you have access to technologically. In other words, if you have something that you can draw on. I noticed Dave in the background here. You must have some kind of a touch screen that you're working on, David Wood. Because I can see that you're doing things and drawing and pointing to the screen. If you have that kind of technology or access to that, then you can draw on a whiteboard and make that happen. So those.
I use ink on my Surface, and if I'm demonstrating, it's live and shows.
Yeah. There's some software options and things that we can certainly look at and see what's available. But those are all options to do as we kind of get more technologically savvy over the next period of time.
Yeah, and that also sounds like something that we need to consider as a separate session in the future to show exactly how you can do this and all the different tools that are accessible to you. for the cheapest way possible for you, so you don't have to go out and buy expensive equipment, utilizing the software and hardware we currently have available, keeping in mind that you want to try to replicate what you do in the classroom for the online as much as you possibly can, and keeping in mind that online for synchronous and online teaching asynchronously is totally different. And so what you're really asking is pretty much the online asynchronous, where you're not physically able to communicate with them in real time, but need to post things to the Blackboard shell so that they can look at it in the future as if you were presenting it in the classroom. And that's where video comes in very handy. So having a separate session on video and all the alternatives for how you can manage that and make your videos, from the very simple, like just using a Google Meet session like this with nobody present, as I mentioned before, to using more sophisticated tools, to using the ink function that Dave Wood mentioned with regard to things like writing over your PowerPoint slides and writing over your Word documents, which are ink functions that are very accessible and available to you. That's something that we need to delve into more deeply.
The other thing that I have found using Notebook is that when I'm finished, I have the video recording, and then I can also export that document as a PDF. And
Kathy, these are really great things, and this is exactly what we need to show people. But we need to do that in a separate session so that we can really delve into it and answer and show people how to do that. And that's exactly what I'm talking about, because there are some really easy, relatively cheap tools that can allow us to do all of these things. I really think that that session, more than anything else, as we move into the fall, is going to be really important for everybody's comfort level, and especially those that have courses converted from on-ground to online, and to try to incorporate what we're talking about here with regard to instructor presence. So due to limited time, I want to continue now and to move on through the agenda for today. And I want to continue this discussion with just showing you some examples, some more examples specifically in Blackboard for what Rick just really well presented, called instructor presence. So how can you do that in a text-based environment as well when you're in an asynchronous mode if you don't want to deliver everything that you're doing with regard to video? Because it needs to probably be some combination of the two. You're going to have to, because if you try to do everything in video for the whole course, you're going to find yourself overwhelmed with the amount of work you have to do to get your course up and running, particularly if you have several of these at the same time. So I think from a practical standpoint, it does have to be a combination of text-based instructor presence, as well as, being able to physically see the instructors, such as with videos. And in some disciplines, it's much more important to have that video. Like, for example, for math instructors or for science instructors when they're demonstrating something, or if you're used to teaching on ground with writing on a whiteboard a lot and interacting that way, then you do need to have software to be able to replicate that. Kathy, is that pretty much what you've noticed in the past?
yes, that is.
Okay, very good. Anybody else have any questions or suggestions before we move on? Rick, how about you in terms of closing out discussion on instructor presence before more examples?
No, we can just move forward to the examples, and if anybody has any questions, we can certainly address those. But yeah, I would just say move forward. We're good. Okay, sounds good. All right, one of the things I want to do first, as you can see on the screen here, is to present with examples. But before I do that, I'm going to escape out of here for a minute, and I'm going to go live into Blackboard, and I'm going to show you one of my courses that I've already taught and try to point out, well, first of all, give you a little background on the course so you understand it real quickly, and then give you some examples of where I think text-based instructor presence is really valuable, and everybody can do this without even video, but video certainly needs to be incorporated as a piece of it, which we'll deal with next week. So this particular course is EDUC 6110A. I think I mentioned it before. It's called Integrating Instructional Technology. It's for graduate students, but we have an equivalent undergraduate course that does pretty much the same thing. So really wouldn't matter if it were online undergraduate or online graduate. It would be basically the same thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into
into week 1 of this graduate course and show you, of course, here you have the welcome. We're going to talk a little bit more about setting up and using the template from what is provided to you from the course, providing an overview, objectives, overview of what you expect them to do that week with regard to textbook readings, assignments, discussion boards, and so on. But going into because this is the first week, you can remember I had mentioned before setting up a folder called Course Introduction. That's all the background information. But now we want to actually look at information as well. But before I do that, I just want to point out that this is what we're going to be looking at on the next several slides: course introduction, the topic, and so on. So I'm going to go out of here now, and I'm going to bring up a couple of slides. And the reason I did this in terms of slides moving forward was because this is going to be on the video for you. And my live demonstration of what I'm doing in Blackboard isn't. So I took a couple of screenshots so that I could talk directly about instructor presence from the screenshots, but they are taken directly from that folder that I was just in, which is starting week 1 into the content delivery for an online asynchronous course. So here is an example. You just saw this live in the course that I just mentioned. The week 1, 2 folders that I set up. One, the course introduction material. And even there, when you set up a folder, don't just set up a folder and then have them click on it. Give them a little bit of background if you can. Very short, maybe like you can see here, on what is in that folder. Now you'll notice that in the folders, I have my items numbered. I'm a very structured guy in terms of systems design and linear approach to handling things. You may not be, and that's perfectly fine. But what I try to do for my students each week is to say, if you want the best way to go through this material effectively, go through it sequentially and do one thing before another rather than jumping around. And the numbering just helps identify that. So anyway, within the course introduction, for example, read the sentence there and you'll say, it's almost like I'm talking to you directly or like I'm talking to you now. Please begin the course by clicking on the course introduction folder above. So I'm talking to them in dialogue, in other words. And then the second paragraph, after you have completed each of the 3 items, then click on this folder link below to begin additional work. So you work them through it in a conversational tone, as Rick talked about before. And then with this particular folder, you don't have to say a whole lot with the instructional materials, because what's going to happen is within there, you're going to have each one of your items that you're going to want to have text-based instructor presence. So for example, the very first way I start this out is, okay, read chapters 1 and 2 before beginning required work. And then I say, as you're reading the chapters, view each of the following videos to further your understanding of just some of the important concepts that are raised. So in other words, I'm telling them not only to read the chapters, but I'm also giving them additional resources as they're reading the chapters. So this is an alternative in some ways to having a voiceover PowerPoint for the chapters. That's another alternative, and it's really good. But for this particular course, for this week of this particular course, because I do have voiceover PowerPoints for other weeks, but for this particular course, because of the content of these 2 chapters that I'm introducing them to at the beginning, I'm thinking you can read this on your own. This is introductory material, but I'm highlighting specific points by using YouTube videos that highlight those concepts. Now, some of those videos would have been in a package that came with the instructional materials from the publisher. I didn't necessarily think those videos were that great. I didn't think they were appropriate or enough of them for supplementing the key concepts. So I went out and spent a lot of time, obviously, on YouTube searching for good ones that were relatively short that kind of highlighted some of the concepts that they're reading about in chapter 1. So I kind of built my own supports and supplementary materials for the chapters so that they could link to these particular videos. You can notice here I gave them the time. So it's only a 2-minute video for the first one. One of the concepts in the chapter was the concept of machine learning and what that means. So by looking at this video, in addition to what they're reading in the textbook, they'd have a pretty good sense. And I'm also giving them page number references so that as they're reading through the chapter, they can also follow along and do the videos. Read a little bit when they get to the next page, look at the video also. That's what I'm suggesting that they do, and that's what I'm telling them that I'm suggesting that they do. Just like I'm telling you right now, only I'm telling you in in live conversation. Again, 2 chapters, so I provide, sorry about that, I provide both of the YouTube links for both of those before they continue any further. So this is the precursor to what's to follow. So after they've done all of that, then several assignments that would be, in this case, graded. So the first assignment is to use the journal entry function of Blackboard, which we're going to be talking about next week in more detail. But because what I'm trying to do here is really show you the instructor presence of how I describe to them what they're doing. So giving them the instruction after reading the first 2 chapters and viewing the supplemental video. So in other words, I give them a segue into, don't just jump into this because you're not going to have the background to do it and to answer this question. So after you've done that, then choose one of the videos that interests you the most and reflect on the video content by answering the following. And this doesn't take, it's a couple of small paragraphs. They can type it in. I can look at it quickly. And then using the rubric that I provided, I will grade them based on 10 points. This is a really good way to help ensure that they're actually doing what you're asking them to do without belaboring the point of grading. Otherwise, they're going to blow you off, and just like they do in class, in face-to-face class, and they're going to go right to, what do I have to do this week to satisfy this guy, and submit the main assignments for this week. So that's it's not exactly formative assessment. It's formative with a grading element to it, so that you can rest assured that they're getting the main point, at least from one of the videos. I don't think you'd want to do this for all the videos that I had put there in the past, but the point here is how you give the instructions. Then the second item that comes after that, notice that that's number 4. Then number 5 would be the actual assignment that I'm going to give them this week. And in this particular case, I'm telling them how to submit the assignment. And you can see that it's underlined. So that's going to be a clue to them, a cue to them, which is kind of saying you need to submit this. I also use a little bit of color here. If you look at the previous slide, you'll notice that I used green, and I'm going to use that consistently through all 8 weeks whenever I'm asking for a journal entry. I'm going to use red when they need to submit an assignment that's worth significantly more points for that particular week. I also put this is where I put small short essay questions in that they have to answer based on their reading from chapter 1 into a Word document, which I'll show you when we talk about how to build assignments next week, attach. So these directions are just saying to the student, okay, now download this file, save it to your computer, and then type in the answer to the short response items right in the document, and then how to upload it using the same document after you replace the XXX with your last name, upload it for grading, and then I download it to my computer, everybody's, I grade them, and then I upload them back as feedback. It's laborious, it's cumbersome, but it works. And it depends on how often you want to do this and so on. I tell them also how many points it's worth here, when it's due, and so on, so that it really reduces this idea of giving full instructions and with an instructor presence idea. Really reduces the number of phone calls you get, the number of text messages you get, the number of emails that you get asking questions. The more deliberate you are in providing information without being too verbose, there's a balance there, will eliminate your requirement to constantly interact. And when you do interact with your students, it can be for more meaningful reasons than just, what do you mean here? Or what am I supposed to do? Or when's the assignment due, kind of thing. And then following along with the next item, if you notice, this one was number 5. Then number 6, after they do that, for that week 1, they're going to engage in a online discussion. But it looks kind of lengthy. But again, if you're going to go into conversational tone and show that you're present there, you're going to have to give them full instructions, and you're going to have to write the instructions in such a way that it becomes meaningful to them. So you have to give them a reason for why they're doing this first. You just don't put them in there. You have to tie it to the material. So in the posting instructions, you give a little bit, like social networking has become a very hot topic for debate, especially because of blah, blah, blah. So it's important that you take a position for or against this controversial statement. You give them the statement, and then you tell them specifically what you want to do with their initial posts and their reply posts to others. And if you give them specific instructions about what's to be included, and you develop a specific rubric that ties to what you're asking them to do specifically, by giving points assigned to each item, then you hold them accountable for what you've asked them to do, rather than just asking for some general bullcrap that they tend to do if you don't give them enough instruction or direction. So this is kind of another way of looking at instructor presence. All the stuff that you would say to them in the classroom if you were having them do or leading a discussion in the classroom about facilitating that discussion. So how do you turn that discussion into something in text that they can do over time, over the next week, and not force them to be in a synchronous session? Because a lot of people have good ideas about how to have instructor presence when you're in a real-time environment using Collaborate Ultra and using the whiteboard in Collaborate Ultra. But unless you put it in video format, you don't have the ability to go into synchronous sessions. So you either do a video and record everything you're doing, or you provide text-based instructor presence. And the best probably scenario is that you mix it up and you do both when it's appropriate based on the content that you have. So does anybody have any questions on the idea of how to provide instructor presence? I also might want to show one more example, if not. So let me escape from here. I'm going to go back live to Blackboard. And I'm going to go back up to when you welcome them for the week. There's a couple of different ways, and instructor presence is really important here, obviously, as they start their next week's worth of work. One way is to, in the overview, write it in as you would be talking to them. And that's what I hope that I accomplished here. In very short order, you can do it a little bit more lengthy. Some people feel like they need to give a longer narrative, but give an overview of what the requirements are going to be. Another thing you can do here, and some people find it valuable, is to simply, in this item here, which we'll talk about next week, how you actually physically do it in Blackboard, is to attach a little video of yourself introducing the week's work. So if you have an 8-week course, it would require 8 short, maybe 5-10-minute videos for you to record, or 15 weeks, same thing. Whatever works for you best. So again, video or through text, the idea is to get the students to feel like you're talking with them, you're conversing with them, you're present, you're there, you understand, and you make very explicit and clear what the expectations are for the week, which again reduces the number of interactions you have to have for clarification and can be more about the material itself, which is what you really want to strive for. Any questions or comments before we continue? Anybody? Anybody have any ideas or want to share anything about how you do? Because many of us already have a lot of experience with teaching online courses. And if there's something that Rick or I have not mentioned with regard to some variations on ways that you can accomplish instructor presence, maybe you would want to share them. If not, we'll continue. Rick, or is there anybody in the chat that maybe has voiced a question or has made a recommendation?
Let me look here.
I was trying to look at the chat while you were speaking, and I noticed, I think Alicia mentioned something about Collaborate Ultra and the whiteboard in Collaborate Ultra, so I tried to work that into my explanation here. And that is something that you can do as long as you're recording it, so that it can then be put up for others to see at another time, especially whenever you're doing it asynchronously, because you don't always have the luxury of building synchronous sessions.
Yeah, I think in the future, I think one of the things that we may do is talk about, and I kind of like Gavin's idea of having people share some of the things that they're doing. And I think, one of the things that I'd like to do is maybe, for lack of a better term, maybe an open discussion or an open panel or whatever, that we can just do something like this. And everybody in committee, we can do kind of a Q&A and a demonstration. And if people have some different ideas, not so different from what we do at what we've done in our January convocations, where people share, maybe not quite as formal, but we just give everybody, like Gavin says, the idea just to kind of share what you're doing. I think this is something that the university, and I don't think any university does well, is share what the faculty are doing, because I think they're what I have seen, and I've had the opportunity to kind of view some of the things that folks are doing, and we're all doing wonderful things that we just need to share. So I think that will be
I don't mean to cut people off in terms of doing it right now, but we are using this 6-session introduction to all of the features of Blackboard, and we do intend through the CIT, I think, as Rick has mentioned, to follow up with a lot of these things. And I think what we want to try to do is make those sessions, like Rick said, more interactive and share ideas, because I'm just showing you some possible ways of doing this, and Dr. Fuller did it a little bit. And so we're not trying to say our ways are the best in any way, shape, or form. We're just trying to get the concepts out there so you can think about them and then use your ideas and ours for best practices. And keeping in mind that subject matter really does matter here. In other words, based on the content that you're delivering is going to dictate a lot of how you do some of these things that we're trying to mention. Okay. Anybody else before we move on? Okay. Let's go back here to the next concept. And what we're going to do now is ask Shannon or Alicia to talk a little bit about instructor understanding of how students actually submit assignments and how they monitor feedback and grades. And I think the best way to handle this is, rather than talking about it, to actually demonstrate. So they're going to demonstrate for you. This instructor understanding and why it's inserted here, I think, is a necessary prerequisite for you to clearly and concisely convey to students. This is part of the introduction that you do to them the first week or the first class meeting, so that they get a strong sense of how you're expecting them to interact with you in what's most important to them, and that is them submitting their work and how they're going to get feedback from you to monitor their performance and their grades as they're progressing through the course. So think about our original intent for this particular series today on Friday, and it was to talk about everything that's important around what you want to do with the students the first time you meet them for your course in all of these different modalities, and what you want to make sure that they feel comfortable with before the second class meeting. So with that said, I'm going to stop presenting and turn this over to Shannon or Alicia.
Okay, thanks, John. I think I'm going to take this on. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. Let me know if you all can see it. Okay, are you guys seeing my screen? No, not yet. Okay. Try again. Okay. Now are you seeing my screen? Seeing anything here, guys?
Now you're coming.
Now it's not showing.
Okay, great. All right, so what I'm going to do is we're going to go ahead and demonstrate what a student might see on their screen. It's a little bit different than the instructor view. So what I thought I'd do is use one of our demo students. So we're going to be Jane's student for the purpose of this demonstration. And I'm going to show you a couple of things today. One, I'm going to go ahead and walk you through submission of an assignment. And then two, John had asked that I show you all kind of how students actually view their grades and what that looks like from the student view. So as you see, we're in Jane's student's home screen. And in order to access a course, we go ahead to the current courses section. I'm going to click on my sandbox course, kind of a course that I use when I want to play around. I'm going to go ahead into one of the weeks, and we're going to submit an assignment. So you'll notice I'm going to scroll down here to one of the assignments. I probably should have enrolled Jane in John's course because I really like the level of detail he has. I don't quite have that here in my Sandbox course. But what I'm going to do is open an assignment, and then we'll go ahead and submit as a student. So I'm going to go to week 2 because there's actually an assignment in there that I haven't already completed. So I'm going to click on a week 2 assignment. The particulars here don't matter, but what I want you to see is this is what it looks like.
Alicia, are you expecting us to see the assignment at this point?
Are you seeing the assignment?
No, I'm only seeing the start here page. So it's a stagnant image that was that you had up initially. So it's not following along for some reason.
You know what? My internet may be really moving slowly. Are you seeing it now? I clicked refresh.
No, we're just seeing I'm just seeing the static image of the start here screen.
Okay.
That's what I see as well.
Yeah, you know, are you seeing me moving? Because I'm thinking my internet might be just a little slow and loading.
No, we're seeing in the tile, like I'm seeing you perfectly well, and it's moving. I mean, it's not choppy or anything.
Okay,
so
I stopped sharing, and I'm going to try to share one more time. I'm just not sure why it's not moving along. Let's see. Okay. Okay, let's try this. Now, what are you seeing?
1 second, it's coming up. Yeah, we're seeing it move, your screen move now.
Yay, okay, success. I went in a different way. So are you seeing, let me go back. So what you're looking at now is week 1?
We're seeing where it says upload. Well, now we're seeing week 1.
Okay, we're moving now. So I'm going to we're in week 1 of a sample course as Jane's student. What I want to do is show you that there are assignments down here. And from the student view, it really does look very much like what you'd see in the instructor view. But what I'd like to do is go ahead and click on an assignment that hasn't been completed from week 2. And I'm going to click on that assignment and show you what it looks like to submit from the student view. Are you seeing now a week 2 open assignment? The upload assignment page?
Yeah, exactly. We're seeing the assignment where it says possible points 20.
Excellent. Okay, so I really wanted to show you all this, and actually I created a step sheet where you can see this as well, and that'll be posted. Hopefully those have been helpful over the last couple weeks, and if you guys like them, we'll continue kind of posting those tip sheets and making them for you. But what you're going to see is with this assignment, I've actually included a rubric. The student can view the rubric by clicking on View Rubric in the way I've set this up. They have some options. This assignment is a group project plan, so they actually have the option of writing their submission. And if they click on Write Submission, they get the text box. They can also, of course, browse their computer and upload an assignment. And so what I'd like to do is go ahead and click on Browse, and then we'll just go ahead and upload, okay, and submit so that you can kind of see the messages that students get. They also have the option to provide comments down there. But we're going to submit, and this assignment is being successfully uploaded here. So what the student would next see is that their assignment has been uploaded. And there's not a lot of text, but this is actually the image then of the assignment. You can see the information they have and that it's not yet graded. So this is also the rubric again, if they want to refer back to it, and they can download that attachment that they've just submitted. Now, what's interesting here is we're going to go back to home and I want to show you all the ways that students can then kind of review their grades and also see assignments yet to be graded. So we're going to go back to Jane's home screen. And from the home screen, Jane can look at a couple of options for checking her grades. The first option is that she can check all of her grades really easily from her tools section. And she can just click on My Grades. And by clicking on My Grades, Jane is actually going to see all her grades for all courses that she's enrolled in. So not just the one that I demonstrated the assignment in, but also a second course that she's registered for. Okay. Now, what you'll notice is that this assignment, the group project plan, hasn't been graded yet, and she needs a note from that. However, I've also submitted an assignment as Jane that I did grade, and you'll see that here at the bottom. And what's nice, just as a quick overview, Jane can also click on the little speech bubble to view any feedback that had been provided for that graded assignment. So that's a nice, quick, and easy way that students can check their grades. I'm going to go back to the home screen real quickly here because there are a couple other options. When students are looking at their home screen, they also can get to the same global navigation screen that we just entered by clicking on the arrow and opening the global navigation menu. So those are two ways that they can kind of get into that menu. And then the My Grades tab is the one with the checked paper icon. And by clicking on that, we go back again to My Grades. Okay, now the other way students can check their grades is if they want to see a grade for a particular course. And on the navigation menu, under My Grades, while she's in the course, Jane can click there, and she'll just see grades for that particular course. And again, you can see a graded assignment example and the ungraded assignment example. Now, if Jane clicks on her graded assignment, she'll see all of the information. She can download the project. There are some comments actually that are included if she wants to look at this through the rubric, and she can see not just the rubric categories, but any feedback that you've placed in that rubric for Jane. Okay. So those are just a couple of the things that I wanted to demo for you. I don't know, John, if you had any other things you wanted everybody to see while I'm in here, or I can, if not, close out of this screen.
Yeah, let's see if anybody has any questions, because I think one of the reason we wanted to do this is because we want to also look at it live from what the student experiences, so that we can better explain the first week of our class how they need to interact with submitting assignments if they're not clear on it. What we want to try to do here is give a different perspective to it. So I think you did a great job with that. Do you want to also, while you're in here, maybe just show, if you can, if there is any, like how they see test results?
Okay. Yes. Now this is a sample course that I built. I do have a test in here. I do not have it graded or results, but I'm going to open the exam here. And I will say, to your point, John, one of the nice resources that we have is that there is a student Blackboard page, like an IT managed page that's set up for students at RMU that kind of walks them through some of the key tasks. Submitting an assignment, submitting a test, those are some of the topics that are covered. And so I can post the link when we finish in the chat box so that students can kind of follow up. That link also on the page contains additional links to Blackboard tutorials and assistance, and that's really a good resource. And they can also access some of that right through Blackboard as well. But I'm going to go ahead and open an exam. And this is just a very simple exam that I set up in here for demo purposes. So if we want Jane to kind of take the exam, we can click begin. Again, I think my connection is moving a little slow with all the open windows. So we'll see if it'll let me take it. Okay. So it is letting me open. I have one question here. You can see the description, how students would view the instructions. This is a timed test. Multiple attempts aren't allowed. You can even see the timer. I think that's kind of...
Shannon, I think your screen froze again, so they're not seeing what you're describing.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Alicia. My fault. I'm sorry.
No, no worries. I just think this is putting a big load on my my router here, to be honest. We'll see if it catches up. Otherwise, I will stop it. And maybe we can include some screenshots on a kind of step sheet.
Well, I also might want to mention that one of our sessions next week is going to deal exclusively with assessments and for the full time. So we'll be going through what you're showing here from the instructor point of view and so on. So I think that seeing it from the student would have been nice, but we'll look at it at that point too.
Okay. Yeah. If you guys aren't seeing it, then I'm going to back out. I'm seeing it, but
well, now we are.
You are? Okay.
Yeah, now it moved.
It's a little slow. I'm telling you, it's a little slow on the upload. But what you're looking at, if you can see, we have the information, we have the description, instructions. We also have the timer. That's really, I think, a nice feature. And again, this is just a one question exam that I created for demo purposes, but we can scroll down to the choices. Are you guys following and seeing the choices? It's a multiple choice. Okay, I'm going to choose one. And I'm going to submit. Okay, and there's the receipt. We do have a step guide from today that kind of gives some screenshots of what it looks like when a student submits an assignment. Again, a lot of this is already on our IT page as well. All right. Are there any questions about any of this or anything else that you want me to try and load? Anybody? Okay. Well then, John, the only other thing I thought I might demo just very quickly is what the lock feature looks like, because I know it came up last time. And
that's great.
Okay, we figured it out. It's a really easy thing. I'll go out of Jane's account and into mine. And you can see that on your screen right now, I hope at least, are you seeing my course? Are you seeing a little video?
Not yet, Alicia, but because I think what's happening is it's stuck again on test submitted exam for Sandbox, but it should catch up like it did last time.
So what I'm going to do is just close that other window completely, and that might help. And I'm going to make sure that I back out of some of that. Okay. And I am going to see if it's, all right. So what are you seeing now?
We're just seeing you. No screen.
Okay. All right. Okay. Okay, I'm going to just describe this because I'm concerned that, oh, are you seeing me now? Are you seeing this course?
It's coming up.
Yeah, okay. It's catching up, like you said. So this is just a quick thing I wanted to share. Are you seeing the Start Here page?
Yes.
Excellent. If you notice, the lock is showing, and it's just a simple little thing. What happens is, a lot of times when we go to our first default, is our announcements page. The lock doesn't show up on announcements. It doesn't show up on send email, but it shows up on the actual content areas. So when you're in any content area, you're going to see the option for the lock as long as you're in edit mode. If you turn edit mode off, it disappears. Turn edit mode back on, the lock reappears. You just won't see it in announcements and emails and other non-content building sections. So that's it. I will turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Sorry about my slow internet, guys.
No problem. Okay. So I'm going to be back, and you should be seeing my screen now. Anybody have any questions for Shannon and Alicia? Alicia, thank you very much. That was great. Because that's what I wanted to try to do here, and we'll be doing that a little bit more in one of the sessions, a couple of sessions next week, looking at it from the student point of view. But keep in mind that you can always go into student preview like I showed you the previous day, and then you don't necessarily have to try to set yourself up as a student. And I think that's the preferable way to do it, so that you're not permanently changing the nature of what's in your course, because you're really not a student in that course.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Please echo that. We don't want that. I mean, you can go into preview mode and see most of this, but it's just kind of cool to get to see it from the impersonation kind of view of students. But that's not something we want people to do. So anything in that mode stays.
Exactly. And I saw in the chat that some people were saying, I can set myself up as a student. Yeah, you might be able to, but again, like Alicia said, no, we're not recommending that. That's what the student preview button is for. Okay, so, and if you have any questions about how to use student preview, because remember, when you're in student preview mode, you can submit assignments, you can do everything and view what the student sees and does, include going into my grades and so on to look to see how that looks. Anybody have any questions or comments before we move on? Okay, then we're ready for the conclusion for today's session. So let me just recap a bit and then turn this back over to Rick. For today's session, what we were trying to get across is for you to be able to prepare and explain to students how they'll be expected to use Blackboard throughout the course as you begin your course, and how to develop meaningful dialogue with students and provide clear and concise explanations, expectations, instructions, especially important for fully online classes, using the concept of instructor presence with either video or text, and understanding and then explaining to students how they're to submit assignments and how they can monitor their feedback and grades. These are things that, the last point here, that I know from experience that students want to know about at the beginning of the course, obviously, because especially those students who aren't as familiar with Blackboard as other students are. So with that in mind, I hope that this week's series was valuable to you, and I hope you come back next week for 4, 5, and 6 on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, where we'll be delving into really more about all of the stuff that that you nuts and bolts have to learn to do in setting up tests, in setting up assignments, in providing links to videos, how to create a YouTube video in Blackboard, all the things that I'm hoping that are the things that you're probably wondering about from an instructional materials perspective, how you specifically accomplish. So I'm going to now turn it over to Rick. And
Thanks, John. Thanks, Alicia. I think a lot of good material, a lot of very fast material. We know that this is covering a lot of ground very quickly, hence why we're loading the material up on the CIT Blackboard shells so that if you wish to access this or go back through, you have the ability to do that. We will be doing some additional sessions. Just a point of reference, I just went in while we've been having this discussion about enrolling yourself as a student in your own class. You can't do it. I'm not sure how anybody has done it, because I just went in and tried to enroll myself in one of the courses I have, and it won't come up. It doesn't show that I'm in there. If I'm already enrolled, it will not let me post myself a second time. You just don't pop up in the ability. What I do know is this: when we have moved people around in certain courses, if you're already enrolled, I can't re-enroll you as an instructor or a TA or a student. You have one role in there. The only way to do that is if you have two accounts in some way. And if you have that, then you can enroll yourself as a student. But if you're using the same account, the system will not let you enroll yourself twice. I've tried it a couple of times, and it's been an issue when we have enrolled. Example, I just recently moved John in our CIT Blackboard shell from a participant to an instructor so he can go in and post some materials and move some things around. And in order for me to do that, I had to delete him as a student in the course in order to be able to reload him as an instructor. There's no way to double load yourself into a course. If you are, or somebody is doing that, it just means you're using two different accounts. And if you have access to that, that's a different thing.
Yeah, that's the reason for using the student preview option that Blackboard does make available to you. That, in other words, that's the option you want to use if you want to see it from a student perspective. That's the tool that they provide for you to do that.
And if you're not sure how to do that, John showed that quite effectively in Wednesday, and the materials are up there so you can re-review that.
Yeah, and I just might want to mention, Rick, the materials are not up there yet. I just checked, and we need to get them. We'll get them up today for session 2. Session 1 is there.
Actually, the MP4 is there. I loaded it up last night.
Oh, well, okay. Well, I went on and I didn't see it, but that's fine. We'll get all the materials for both session 2 and 3 up today so that people will be able to use them over the weekend.
Yeah. Okay, if anybody, like we said, if you have ideas, and there were some things that I pulled out of the chat today, some things that we may try and do in coming events. We don't want to overload people's schedule with things, but we may try and do, just in a future session, kind of a best practices. We'll do some round robin sharing. We'll do some Q&A. We'll let some people share some different ideas, because as I have universally said, there are great things going on in our classrooms, not only within the face-to-face, but in what we do synchronously, how we utilize asynchronous materials. I think there's just a tremendous amount of resource that exists from within this faculty, and we want to tap that. We want to share what you're doing, because we're all kind of working together, and this is kind of an untapped resource. So this is what we're doing. I thank you all for attending. If any of you have any questions, please feel free to ask. And if there's things that we haven't covered that you'd like, please drop me an email, and we'll see what we can do to kind of put some things together. Okay. Very good, all. If there are no other comments or questions, I'm going to stop recording. And I will say, everybody have a great weekend, and we hope to see you Monday morning at 10.
You too.
Thank you.